بسم الله والحمد لله. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى واغفر لنا ذنوبنا ولا تأخذنا بقصورنا. لا تأخذنا بقصورنا واعمل معنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So inshallah we're still on the the third section, Bab al-Thalith, the third gateway, in the explanation of مرات الطلاب by Sheikh Uthman Danfoudi rahmatullahi alayhi. So the author begins, and in this section we try to go over some of the points. I want to break this up into two last sections before going into a review of what we have studied so far. So the framework for the way we're going to proceed is we're going to break this up into about 2 or 3 sections. And the 3 sections are going to be to go over this gateway of knowledge, the third gateway of knowledge, with a little more detail. Then we're going to have a review session. So I'll try to make this in about 2 sessions if possible, and then go over a review session in which we'll cover the first gate, the second gate, and then come back to the third gate again. So it's possible to just do this in 2 sessions and then regroup on the third session, the review session, capture whatever was missing here. So let's do it that way, or like that. It'll be easier for those who are following or keeping along. So the author says, وَأَقُولُ وَبِاللَّهِ التَّوْفِيقِ إن الله تعالى أثبت جميع أصول الدين في القرآن العظيم. So he uses the word جميع. So he says that, and I say, and with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the tawfiq. Now the interesting thing here, and I don't want to go into a lot of details, but the scholars, they have a discussion on the meaning of al-ba, the letter ba here, harf al-ba. So does it mean al-isti'ana, or does it mean al-musahaba? Usually the discussion comes up when there's an analysis on the meaning of basmala, the basmala, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, at the beginning of a text. When we talk traditionally, the scholars had different ways to explain text. And one of the most common features of textual explanations is to begin with the meaning of al-basmala. And so they go into an analysis of what is the meaning of saying Bismillah. Is it to say that the author is beginning with the name of Allah for the sake of bringing abundance and blessings? Or is the author saying, I begin in the name of Allah, relying upon Allah? in seeking support and assistance from Allah. It is isti'ana. So here, obviously, he's mentioning, he's beginning with seeking support from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, tawfiq. And the tawfiq is an interesting word, so to speak. Is an interesting word because it requires one to have an understanding that there is a sense of what is said in the English language, grace. There's a sense of facilitation that comes from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And so you can say that the author is depending upon Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala in in that regard, seeking from Allah the facilitation of continuing this text or this section. And then he goes on to say that assuredly or clearly, Allah has established the principles of deen in the Quran. And here he's talking about the principles of belief. And he's using the tripartite system, which is very common amongst the scholars of ilm al-kalam. But it became something that's widespread. And so you can imagine a circle with the principles of the deen being written in the middle. So he's using the tripartite system, that which pertains to the ilahiyat, that which pertains to discussions about who Allah is. In regards to Allah's oneness, that's for a starting point. Then you have another section or another title here, Nubuwat, that which pertains to prophets, and that which pertains to the Samiyat, that pertains to that knowledge which is only known by transmission or hearing. And so that's the system that he's using here. But he doesn't get into philosophical discussions too much at all. The first thing that he brings up is that Allah Ta'ala has established clearly that the universe and everything that is seen is created. Right. So the first thing that is established, هو الذي يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده. That Allah is Khaliq. Right. And so the creation is coming into existence or origination, and it's coming back after its destruction or its ending, so to speak, is in the power of Allah. And Allah is Khaliq wa kulli shay. Allah is the creator of everything. Right? And in that regard, that would be that which is seen and unseen. And then he moves on to say that has established Allah has established that He's uh, has existence by necessity. I'm sorry, because I heard something and I was trying to make sense of what it was. If there was a need for me to investigate. But here he says, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٌّ فَاطِرُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And the ayah of the Quran is saying that is there doubt that Allah is the originator of the heavens and the earth? وأثبت كونه قديما بقوله هو الأول. The term qadim is used quite often in ilm al-kalam, and the meaning or what is approximate can be found in the Quran, but the term itself is not found in the Quran exactly as is said. Yeah, I like the way that Sheikh Muhammad Sharif translated. He says, this is because Allah Ta'ala has established the creation of His words is there that He is the originator of the heavens and the earth, and by His words, or have they been created by nothing? And by His words, that is because Allah is the real. He is the exalted, established the fact that by that His existence is before time. Uh, and this is coming up. So this is coming before when it says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. وبقوله ذلك بأنه هو الحق وأثبت كونه قديما. بقوله هو الأول أثبت كونه باقيا وتوكل على الله الحي الذي لا يموت. Right. So the idea of the equivalent of the term qadim, sorry for the distractions, families up and about. So here the idea أثبت كونه قديما, the term that's used in ilm al-kalam is qadim, but the term that's used directly in the Quran and Sunnah is supposed to overlap in meaning is هو الأول, which is one of the names of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And the name of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala as being Baqi is understood in the Quran according to Shaykh Ahmed al-Fodi in the ayah توكل على الله وتوكل على الحي الذي لا يموت. So rely and depend upon Allah, the one who is the one who's living without, there's no boundary on this description of life, right? The one that does not die, or the one that's existence doesn't come to an end as well. The one who remains. That's unfathomable for us because we think of things in terms of beginning and end, or at least in terms of beginning with no end. We imagine that, but to think of reality in that sense, no beginning, no end, but just is difficult for us at face value. But here the Quran is bringing that forward. And before that, the question was posed: أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ? And this is, in this sense, very important. So did human beings come into existence, or did things come into existence in general, right? Or did they come, or did they create themselves, or are they creators? I don't see. Thank you. I don't see an equivalent in the translation. Give me 1 second, because I'm reviewing the translation as well. The translation says, "Or have they been created by nothing?" Uh, the Quranic ayah is a little more in depth than that, although that captures the essence. Or have they been created by nothing? But the Quranic ayah, it goes to a little more depth. The flow of it is a question, and the question forces the listener to consider, or to reflect, or to think. أم خلقوا من غير شيء, right? Have they been created from nothing, right? أم هم الخالقون, or are they the creators, right? And so, in that regard, the basic translation, or have they been created by nothing, is okay, but it doesn't capture the whole thing. That could be translated directly from the Quran, or taken directly from the translations of the Quran. But one of the things that's important here is the ayat that Sheikh Uthman Fodio is choosing for this. And then he comes, Sheikh Uthman Fodio quotes the Quran. ذلك بأن الله هو الحق. That's a strong uh, ayah of the Quran, right? In which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is stating that He is the truth, He is the real. And then this is what He translated Shtiri Muhammad Sharif. That is because Allah, He is the real, right? But it also should state the truth, right? أثبت كونه قديما, we already went over that. And He established that He is ancient, right? هو الأول, and He's the first, is really what the Quran says. Qadim, as I mentioned, is the term that's used by the scholars of Ilm al-Kalam, as opposed to Hadith, as opposed to that which is new, or that which is birthed. And so then also it's established in the Quran, وَأَثْبَتَ كَوْنَهُ بَاقِيًا بِقَوْلِهِ وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ. So rely upon, take as your guardian, right? The one who is living and does not die. We talked about that already. Possessor of all life. وَأَثْبَتَ كَوْنَهُ مُخَالِفًا لِخَلْقِهِ. Okay, so then now there's a distinct feature which is introduced after Allah wa Ta'ala is being introduced to us by way of these ayat. as being the creator and what that entails. Now, the ayat is brought up is ayat متعلقة بالتشبيه. قاعدة في التشبيه. It's an ayat which is a principle in uh, similitude or comparison between things. I don't want to say between Allah and things, but here it says in the ayat, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. This ayat is a foundational ayat. All the Sunni schools of thought in Aqidah use it to make their point. And then, so the idea here is that nothing is like Allah. Nothing that's created is like Allah. There's no comparison between the two. There's no ability to compare, to be honest with you, because we know Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala by way of indication, and we know the creation by way of scientific investigation, so to speak. And I'm not necessarily talking about chemistry and biology, physics, and all that, although that can be part of it. But we know the creation by reflecting upon it with detail that's in front of us, certain qualities. Mostly what we see is in al-alim, is in that which is seen. And so we don't know Allah in that way. The creation, especially the universe, points to the reality of Allah, but the Quran clarifies for us who Allah is. Okay, so then now, after the point of that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is unlike the creation, وَأَثْبَتَ كَوْنَهُ غَنِيًّا. So it's established that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is independent, does not rely upon anything. In the Quran it says, Wallahu huwa al-ghani, right? Allah is the possessor of all uh, wealth and so on and so forth. But the concept here is that Allah is independent, right? That Allah is free of need. That's a better way of saying it. وَأَثْبَتَ قَوْنَهُ وَاحِدٍ, right? In the ayah of the Quran, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٍ. They say that Allah is one. The ayah that came before is Wallahu al-Ghani. Allah is the one that's free of need. Here, Allah is one. وَأَثْبَتَ قَوْنَهُ قَادِرٍ, right? أثبت أن الله قادر. Right. So here it says إن الله على كل شيء قدير. That can be understood in a couple ways. One here says that he translated as Allah is omnipotent. He has power over all things. He has power over all things. And here, Qadir is such a complicated term from some angles. From the angle of, is it just power, or is it that everything is determined, has an identity, is known, has its limitations, has its rules, and everything that goes into that? You can put that under the issue of power, uh, but it misses the nuance. It misses the nuance. So Allah wa Ta'ala gives everything a determined point and oversees it, monitors it, you know, is a judge over it, so to speak. وأثبت كونه مريد بقوله فَعْلٌ فَعْلٌ لِمَا يُرِيد. فَعْلٌ لِمَا يُرِيد. So here, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has irada, will, and does what Allah wills, so to speak. The acts of Allah are by Allah's will. And those things are, that idea, to be more precise in language, is implied when we say that Allah huwa al-Ghani, Allah huwa al-Qadir, right? And then he moves on to say that وَأَثْبَتَ كَوْنَهُ عَالِمٍ, in the ayah of the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٍ, and that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, with regard to all things, has precise knowledge, or is all-knowing. وَأَثْبَتَ كَوْنَهُ حَيٍّ. In reality, that already came up in the ayah وَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى الْحَيِّ, but as an independent category, it didn't. And he mentioned the same ayah, وَهُوَ الْحَيِّ, or he mentioned the same part of the ayah, وَهُوَ الْحَيِّ, uh, which, which was already mentioned, that Allah is living. Right? وَأَثْبَتَ كَوْنَهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. أسمع وأرى. So here he's saying that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is all hearing and all seeing. And but it's not just any type of seeing. It has insight over all things. Like the perception is insightful in this regard. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. And so Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala here is أثبت كونه متكلما, possessed of speech. Here the Quran is saying that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala spoke to Musa, وأثبت كونه مختار في الفعل والترك. وربك وربك يخلق ما يشاء ويختار. So here is a little more complicated to translate. Let's see how he translates this. But before going there, here the ayah of the Quran reads, وَرَبُّكَ, your Rabb, the one who created you and sustained you and takes you from one point to your end, creates. Here the difficult thing is to translate al-Mashiyah, because Mashiyah is a little different than the will of Allah. And so here, for the sake of simplicity, we say what Allah wills or aims at, knowing that there's a difference between al-Mashiyah and al-Irada. But here we can say that the two are similar to each other because we're talking about the issue of the creation. But there's a nuance. There's a nuance between the two. It's determination, we can say. Not we can say that determination. And so Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala creates what is determined and chooses. Let's see how he translated that. He translated it as and your Rabb or your Lord creates what he wills and he alone chooses. That's how he translated that. So the idea here is that the foundations of ilahiyat as a concept to be studied in usul al-din is founded in the Quran itself. So a reflection upon the Quran allows us to extract key concepts, for lack of a better term at the moment, key concepts or foundational principles with regard to who Allah is. With regard to who Allah is. And I'm thinking to myself that in reality, if we're going to go like this, it's definitely going to need 3 sessions. It's definitely going to need 3 sessions in order to go like this, and or to just stop at every line. وأدلة للنبوة من القرآن or للنبوات نبويات he says actually, but it can be said in nubuwat as well. So that which pertains to prophetology, you can translate it as that, or that which pertains to prophetology would be the study of the prophets. That's what the nubuwiyat would mean. I prefer the term nubuwa, but that's not what's used here. Prophethood. You don't want to get too philosophical at this point, especially if you're saying that the foundations of the deen are not that which are a subject matter that is related to disputation and rational proofs and so on and so forth. You kind of keeping it bare bones, and you're talking about what's foundational in the text. So in any event, that's how the scholars of Kalam laid it out. So I don't want to get into too much of a reflection on that, other than to say that, part of the issue that comes up here is when we talk about nubuwiyat, the study of prophethood. And then we talk about that as being essential to usul al-din. And we say that usul al-din, here he says, I'll take directly from the text. He says that the distinction between usul al-din and ilm al-kalam, what is it? The distinction, as for the distinction between this science, usul al-din, and the science of ilm al-kalam, is that when usul al-din is coupled with the devising of sound rational proofs, along with mentioning circumstances behind the teachings of the people that have deviated, or various groups that have deviated, or that have opinions that are different than those of the people of Quran Sunnah, whether they be Ahl al-Bid'ah or the philosophers. And this is considered the science of Ilm al-Kalam and the foundations of Usul al-Din. And he talked about this in another place as well. This is just uh, a review on that point. So this people is where sometimes on these types of notions, we have to make the distinction is important. Why? Because of so many Aqidah debates. So we want to be able to know where there's a common ground, know where we're entering into an area where there may be some discussion which begins to take place. And we want to be able to say that this is foundational belief in which we don't engage in too much discussion over it. It's clearly universal. But the idea nubuwiyat is a concept which comes from ilm kalam, the study of prophet. Sorry about that. We got frozen. We were frozen for about that. We got frozen. We were frozen for a second. Sorry about that. So the study of prophetology is a legitimate study, and I'm not saying that because I'm declaring it to be legitimate, but it's a legitimate study in the sciences of Aqidah. But at the basic level, what we need to know is just what are the qualities of the Rusul. So he says, وَأَثْبَتَ صِدْقُ الرُّسُلِ. So the Quran here is teaching us that with regard to one of the qualities of the messengers, and that is that they are truthful, right? That they speak truth. That their sidq is a little more than just truth. Sidq, it pertains to, or is a little more nuanced, I should say. Sidq pertains to, in one sense, congruency between what's in the heart, what's being said, and what's being done, removed from hypocrisy. It also means truthfulness. In Ilm al Kalam, it has a specific meaning and application. Mostly it's applied to speech being true. Sometimes it can apply to words, but among uh, the examples of the early generation, we have the idea of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, as-Siddiq. So the idea of Siddiq, it has to do with conforming oneself to what is principle and true. Right. وَأَثْبَتَ أَمَانَاتَهُ. So here is the idea that the Quran is establishing that the prophets and messengers are people of trust. They fulfill their trust. إِنِّي لَكُمْ رَسُولٌ أَمِينٌ. That indeed I am a entrusted person to you. وَأَثْبَتَ تَبْلِيغَهُ. Here is that the Quran is establishing the responsibility of the messengers and the prophets to convey the message. Those they're described as those who they fulfill the delivery of the message. And also, Sheikh Uthman, which is interesting here, this first time he قد أبلغوا رسالات رب يتزوجون, and that they are human beings that marry. وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَذُرِّيَّةً. It's not only that they marry, but also that they have children. وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَذُرِّيَّةً. We made for them, or we gave them wives and children. وَأَثْبَتَ كُونَهُمْ يَأْكُلُونَ الطَّعَامَ وَيَبِيعُونَ وَيَشْتَرُونَ. And so here is another series of qualities with regard to the messages and the prophets, that they eat and they drink, that they sell and that they buy. The human beings in that regard. And the Quran says, يَأْكُلُونَ الطَّعَامَ وَيَمْشُونَ فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. That they eat and they enter into the marketplace, or they walk in the marketplace. I want to stop here, people, because it's not. We're going to carry out the lecture for probably another 10, 15 minutes if I continue, and I don't want to make the video too long. I appreciate your company in this journey. Um, So we stopped on page 23 of the translated piece. We stopped there, 117:24. You always mark where it is that you stop the date, and you go back with time, and you can see when it was that you read. And that's the way of the ulama. It's the way of the scholars. They usually do that. It allows them to keep track in their own way. There's other ways to do it, but that's their way. Sometimes they even put the place. I usually put the place where I'm in, where I'm residing. And when I go back into my notes, I look at when I read something. Usually, also even I would put who I read with. If I read, especially if I read with a small group of people. But we ask Allah Ta'ala to give us insight, to forgive us, and to allow us to establish what it is that we learn and practice with sincerity and gain acceptance from Allah Ta'ala. So, inshallah, next week we continue. Uh, we missed the day this week. Inshallah, we continue next week on normal schedule, and which is Mondays and Wednesdays. Tuesdays we're supposed to have the community building, and based on the teachings of Uthman bin Fodi, which, to be honest with you, I haven't been keeping up with it. But inshallah, next week we will continue. Whatever is uploaded onto YouTube is accessible, inshallah, from what has been done in the past. And with time, we'll better the process. We, we wanted to at least get this moving, but there's still a lot that can be done in terms of bettering the system of delivery and so on and so forth. And remember, يعني العلم بالمذاكرة. So the knowledge is with a continued review of what it is that you have studied and learned. So this requires some review. I just want to say lastly that the presentation of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodi here is very essential because this allows Muslims to have some sort of a common ground, and this is working directly with الدليل التفصيلي من الكتاب. So this is working directly with detailed evidences from the Quran with regard to the issues of Aqidah. And that's important because a lot of times we're getting into things that people have said with regard to who Allah is and philosophical debates before we know what's foundational. So it's important to review that.